We are doing Extra Life again this year, where you can mash buttons, roll dice, play games, and help kids along the way. I hope you'll be a part of that with us. Stick around after the video for more information.
christiangeekcentral.com. All right, buckle up. This car has a spoiler. I just got out of Dark Phoenix, which is likely to be the last X-Men movie with the cast that we've had since X-Men First Class, which I'm kind of sad about, but that's the likelihood given the purchase of Fox by Disney. So let's just jump into the spoiler stuff. Mystique dies, and that, I don't know, that didn't bother me that much. I thought the death scene was good. They handled it well. She performed it well. But I don't know. I think the character of Mystique, I've never been especially drawn to. I've always felt a little bit like Mystique became a central character in the reboot cast movies because Jennifer Lawrence became a huge star. I think if Jennifer Lawrence, this is speculation, I think if Jennifer Lawrence had not become a huge star, that Mystique would not have had such a prominent role. And she wouldn't have ended up a hero in the end. I think she would have continued down the dark path and just been kind of a villain, you know. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, she became kind of a pretty central figure in these movies, and I think that they did a good job in taking a character that I wasn't very interested in and giving me a few reasons to be interested in her. But I think the material they had to start with as a character concept, you know, Mystique wasn't like the best starting point for me as a character concept. So anyway, seeing her go was not that big of a deal, and I think fans were already kind of suspecting it. But anyway, so that's the big shocking death until the end. So let's jump to the end. Jean Grey dies, and gosh, I think this will probably come out in my review, but I feel like this ends this X-Men series of movies on a little bit of a whimper instead of a bang, you know? The climax just didn't have the as big of a scale, to my mind, as X-Men Apocalypse did, fighting Apocalypse, and just the massive power levels he had at his disposal. And sure, Jean Grey as Phoenix had, you know, mammoth power levels too, but we didn't see him on the same scale. I mean, a lot of the climax took place in kind of, it was like a fight happening on a moving train, you know? And that's almost like, as far as like scale of action goes, that's kind of like a mid-movie type of action sequence rather than, I mean, these days, rather than like the climax, especially if you're a superhero movie, and you're a multiple superhero movie. You know, if it was Spider-Man, then maybe you could see the end happening, you know, on a train, a moving train. But when you get to a team of superheroes, something like Avengers or X-Men, I just expect something bigger, especially after X-Men Apocalypse. So, but anyway, Jean dies, and they named the school after her, which I thought was kind of interesting and fitting. And, you know, as far as where they left things, it felt in many ways like, okay, this is kind of like how I would want to end this franchise, you know? Like, Xavier is retired, and I guess he's just going to go have a retirement life with Magneto of some kind, and I guess that makes sense, but at the same time I'm like, well, what does that life look like? It almost felt like it could be a tease. Like, what do you mean, you know, you're offering Xavier a home, Eric? Are you doing another mutant colony that you're inviting him to, or what is this home you're talking about, you know? So I was left kind of wondering what that looked like. And then also having them end as friends felt a little bit like the end of X-Men Apocalypse. I thought it was very significant. I had just watched all three of the prior X-Men movies with the First Class cast, say that 5 times fast, leading up to my viewing of this movie this week. Over the course of about a week, I watched the last 3 movies, and so they're fresh in my mind. And it was really significant as an arc, I thought, to have those two end as friends at the end of that movie. I'd forgotten until I watched it again last night. Wow, they really legit end as friends. There's no tension between them. They're not, Eric goes off to be his own man and do his own thing or whatever, but they are friends. There's complete peace between them. And so basically, to have this movie create some tension between them again that was pretty brief, and then have them be friends again, I didn't think it felt like rinse and repeat, as far as that arc. And in general, I thought that Magneto's arc in Apocalypse was great because he had just rebuilt a family, and then it was taken away from him very tragically. And so I felt like the emotion that was driving a significant character arc in the last movie was greater and more impactful to me than any emotions driving any character arc in this movie. So both in terms of character drama and the scale of the stakes at the end of the day, I felt like we're less than X-Men Apocalypse. I do appreciate that it was grounded more. The visual effects really looked CG and not really great CG to me in Apocalypse. And so the fact that they had a smaller scale of effects and action set pieces and stuff in this movie does have the benefit of, not being as ambitious and having cheap looking CG. But of course that's not going to bother most people, that's a thing that I deal with. Anyway, the last thing that kind of that kind of takes away the feeling of, okay, is this the end? Is this a nice, tidy ending? They're renaming the school. So I guess they're going to be called the Gray Men. I don't know, instead of the X-Men. Mystique made a joke, or kind of a jab at Xavier at one point. You might want to think about renaming the school X-Women, because the women are the ones doing the saving around here, and I don't know what that was about. That feels a little bit like just a little minor agenda item on the writer's part, but whatever. So they renamed the school after Jean, which it would be weird to have another X-Men movie and it to be called, the Gray Men, or Jean Grey's School for Gifted. I don't know. That's a weird place to put it unless you were putting the series to bed. That's a weird status quo change. And then, let's see here. Then X-Men, or Xavier and Magneto go off and retire together. But then there's this monologue over the top of the ending where Jean is talking about how this isn't the end of me, I've evolved or something, and it's not the end of the X-Men. And then as the camera pans away from the final conversation with Xavier and Eric, we see a fiery phoenix streaking across the sky in the distance, which says to me, well, she's totally still alive, That was an even bigger reference to the fact that she's coming back than at the end of X-Men 2, when we barely just caught an image of a fiery phoenix under the water at Alkali Lake. And so to have such a strong indicator that Jean Grey is still alive, that the X-Men are not done, and then to not have a sequel with the same cast is a bummer to me. There was no end credit sequence, and the website that I looked up to confirm that made the point that since Disney bought this franchise and they're probably going to be the ones that are continuing on with it from this point with a rebooted cast or whatever and integrated into the MCU, that teasing another X-Men movie with this cast is probably not something they would want to do. So I'm wondering if there was a planned post-credit scene. I mean, this thing was filmed, I believe, and even largely done, had post-production work done on it before that deal happened with Fox and Disney. So I don't think this movie was being made necessarily with the intention that this is going to be the last one in the First Class franchise. And so it's a bummer because it feels like there's another movie that they wanted to do with these characters, another Phoenix-oriented movie that explores what Jean Grey has become now, and that maybe would have really kicked it into the cosmic realm even more so than they did with this movie by introducing space aliens. So I'm kind of bummed that at the thought that there might have been a vision for a second movie that's totally not going to happen. that makes this movie feel just a little bit, not a lot, not so much that it's unsatisfying, and it can't be a satisfying end in some respects to this franchise, but it does feel just a little bit like it's ending on a whimper and with the rug being yanked out from under it, That's kind of a bummer. This felt a bit like a setup. And with the cast members being as young as they are, setting aside, my issues with the fact that some of them should have been aging a whole bunch that have not shown hardly any signs of age. But I'm talking about like Scott and Nightcrawler and Storm. These actors and these characters are still very young. This could and Charles Xavier and Magneto don't have to be young characters, so this cast could totally continue with like 3 more movies, and we could watch these other characters grow and mature, So I'm kind of bummed. I really don't think that they're going to take this I would be surprised if they tried to take this cast and integrate them into the MCU. I think it would just be too messy because they've been around. I mean, the MCU superheroes really started appearing in that world 10 years ago, and these X-Men characters have been around since the 60s in this established X-Men timeline. So I think it would just be too messy, Yeah, and if I forget to mention it in my review, which I will try not to, my gosh, I did the math. Xavier and Magneto were both born at about 1934 in this franchise timeline. So they should be really close to 60 years old, both of them in this movie. I would maybe buy that Magneto looks like a really young late 50s guy in his late 50s. I would maybe buy that. But I do not buy that James McAvoy's Xavier looks like he is in his mid to late 50s. I don't buy it, So I do not get that at all. Man, maybe he's got Bruce Willis's powers and he shaved his head at just the right time to become immortal, Or Patrick Stewart's powers, for that matter, even more appropriate. But anyway, so I think we're probably going to get a complete reboot of the X-Men franchise, which, okay, I guess. But it's a little bit of a shame because I just think there's so much potential. I think more so than the Avengers, the X-Men is a franchise where you can have a team whose members keep getting replaced by younger heroes, and those heroes are just as able to sustain, the franchise with their recognition power. There are so many X-Men that, as X-Men, are really recognizable that you could just cycle them through 4 or 5 at a time and introduce a new cast that's younger, and they could really keep this franchise going. And James McAvoy and what's his dude playing Magneto, whose name escapes me at the moment, could keep going for a while. And I thought they were pretty good at their parts, especially what's his dude, who I don't know why I've been able to remember his name more than James McAvoy's, I think, over the years, but because I really like him as an actor. But I like him as Magneto, and so I'm bummed that they probably will not continue in those roles unless they do some really wonky, and they could some really wonky alternate timeline merging, which they could totally do after the events of Endgame. Will they do that? That would be crazy. But you know what? I would be totally on board for that. If they think audiences can handle that. I am game. All right. Well, those are all my spoilery thoughts for now. Thanks for watching. Bye. Okay, I'm at home in my garage, and I just remembered that there's one thing I wanted to say about this movie. I wanted to compare it to X-Men 3, X-Men United or whatever, because that covered the same ground as the Dark Phoenix. As this movie, it covers the Dark Phoenix story, and as much as that movie was kind of a letdown in some ways when I saw it compared to the 2 X movies before it, I think I'm more satisfied with how they treated the Dark Phoenix story arc in that one. Spoilers for X-Men 3 coming up if you haven't seen it yet. And it's been long enough that, I feel like we're good on that. But, Scott gets killed early on, and, the difference between Scott getting killed early on in that movie and Mystique getting killed early on, both by the Phoenix, in each case, is that Scott and Jean were romantically in love. They were in love with each other. And so I felt like that connection made his death much more like brutal and shocking and like, oh my gosh, And then also later on in the climax of that movie, she is killed by Wolverine, who also romantically is entangled with her. There's another, romance there that is right at the center of the climax, and Wolverine killing her to stop her and to save everyone else. So I felt like there was a lot more interesting character tension in the climax of that one, whereas in this one, she kills Mystique. She almost kills Scott near the end, but doesn't, pulls back, and then she just flies up into the sky and kind of sacrifices herself, And I didn't find that near as moving, as Logan having to kill Jean. And I think she even asked him to do it, I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, I thought that was such a better character-driven climax in X-Men 3 compared to this one. So, yeah, just one more way that it kind of let me down. All right, that's all I want. I think I wanted to get that. I think the power levels maybe of Phoenix were bigger in this one. So in that regard, I think people got more of what they, wanted maybe out of the Dark Phoenix in this one, if you're fans of that. And then also they were more true to the cosmic space origins of the Phoenix in this movie, but I don't think that helped the movie at all, honestly, having it come from outer space. I suspect, it always sounds more silly when you say outer space, so I'm not being fair by saying it that way. But I felt like we didn't get a development of what the Phoenix was really. Got just a hint. It sparked all of life in the universe, or all of creation, or something like that, But I felt like we didn't get a true understanding of what the Phoenix is, and I get the feeling that's what they would have developed in a sequel. So I hope they do. I hope they merge this continuity with the MCU and we get a sequel that continues this story and just kind of pays off the Phoenix and some of these characters in a little bit more of an effective way. And they could do it. This would be so cool. They could, merge this timeline, but monkey with it a little bit so that you could have a rebooted younger Wolverine, in the mix. We could have our cake and eat it too if they do this right, which would be really cool. All right.
It is time for Extra Life again, and I'd love for you to be a part of it with me. Here's a recycled but slightly modified promo to tell you more. Once again this year, Christian Geek Central is participating in Extra Life. This is a charity that raises funds for the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals, which provides free medical care to children whose families could otherwise not afford it. And this is very often for critical, life-saving treatment. Joining our team only requires a willingness to ask your family and friends to consider donating toward your fundraising efforts. Participants also usually do something fun and game-related to draw attention to their fundraising efforts, like a special game night at your home or your church, or like me, you could do a crazy 24-hour video gaming marathon. Now, I'm theming it around video games, but really this event can be themed around any kind of gaming, which includes both video games and tabletop games of any kind. What you do to raise funds is entirely up to you, but I would love for you to consider joining the Christian Geek Central Extra Life team. As team leader, I'll be there to help answer your questions, provide some helpful tips if I can, and just in general be your fundraising cheerleader and try to draw attention myself to your fundraising efforts. You can get more information about the event as a whole at extra-life.org, and if you choose to sign up there, be sure to select Christian Geek Central as your team so I can get in touch with you and then just help in whatever way I can. Fundraising can begin at any time, but our main push is going to be through the month of October leading up to November 2nd. That's the annual Extra Life Game Day, when I'll be streaming my 24-hour video gaming marathon live and trying to stay awake without throwing up. More details on my live stream as we get closer to it. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.